Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, the Federal Tax Lien. What is it? During this program, the presenter will cover the following: how, when, and why the federal tax lien arises, the purpose of the publicly recorded notice of the federal tax lien, the place of filing of the NFTL, including jurisdictions and national registries, the broad scope of the government's lien, the participants need to know, and the NFTL's impact on other matters, the statutory authority, right, title, and interest in real property, right, title, and interest in personal property, including titled and untitled assets, rights to property, both tangible and intangible, lien properties, statutory superpriority, recorded and unrecorded liens, the concept of joint and several liabilities for married taxpayers, and finally, after acquired assets.
I'd like to point out before we begin that this is a very introductory presentation. A comprehensive course of instruction on the federal tax lien would encompass several hours of instruction, and my intent here is to familiarize you with the federal tax lien and why it may impact you in your practice. So the first slide is on the screen, the federal tax lien. What is it? Who was the whiz kid that came up with this idea? Well, in a way, you all did, because the men and women that you elected to send to Congress put the federal tax lien into existence. As we know it today, the federal tax lien was created in 1966, but it actually goes back to prior to the individual income tax to other taxes, and actually existed prior to the turn of the last century. And so let's drive on here. And if I knew how to click to the next slide, I think I would.
Sure, Robert. So if you put your cursor over that blue and green globe, there you go.
There we go. Okay. And the screen is on the slide is on the screen. Excuse me. And you can read it. I'm not going to read it to you, but the basic concept is the federal tax lien, as it exists now, establishes a collateral interest in all of your property when you fail to pay your tax. Unlike other liens, when you grant a mortgage to a lender and take money to pay off that house, or to purchase that house rather, the lien applies specifically to that property. The federal tax lien is much more broad in scope. What you see now are the three conditions that exist for the federal tax lien to arise, and arise is the word that the Internal Revenue Service uses. There has to be an assessment, notice and demand, and the taxpayer fails or refuses to pay the tax. So, the federal tax lien does not necessarily have to be a published document. It actually arises or comes into existence after the tax is assessed, the three conditions that we saw in the previous slide. And it exists as a statutory lien, sometimes known as the secret lien. Sometimes even the taxpayer doesn't know about it at that point in time, depending on whether the taxpayer is paying attention to his mail and so on. Right? There is another phase of the federal tax lien. Right? It's called the notice of federal tax lien. That's where a document is actually recorded in the appropriate venue to give public notice that a lien does exist on a taxpayer. Okay. The federal tax lien applies to all of a taxpayer's property and rights to property. Right? Why do you need to know? Well, because these are the kinds of things in your practice that you probably see on a day-to-day basis. Divorce cases, estate tax cases, purchase and sale of real estate. All of a sudden you go along and everything is working out very nicely, and in the title search, when you're trying to close on a piece of real estate, you discover the federal tax lien. There's a big monkey wrench. Everything comes to a grinding halt. And so a lot of the things that you do as part and parcel of your practice, will be affected by the federal tax lien. You might have, and we'll talk about some. We have some examples of some of these as we go forward in the presentation. One that we don't have is for sales at public auction, and that's always a nice one because there are some people that can't resist a bargain, and that property that's being sold on the courthouse steps for pennies on the dollar seems like it's too good to pass up. And they'll go buy it, bid on it and buy it, and find out that it's attached after the fact. The authority for the federal tax lien, as I said, comes from the men and women that you sent to Congress, who in 1966 enacted the Federal Tax Lien Act, from which were generated the Internal Revenue Code sections, the first three of which, 6321, 2, and 3. There are a handful of others. 6324 pertains to estate taxes. 6325 pertains to lien certificates, withdrawal certificates, release certificates, discharge and subordination of the federal tax lien, and so on. And, of course, the Act also contributed to the creation of the public law